Well, it helps if I turn off my mic and then you can hear me. All right, let's try that intro all again. Did you guys get my personal story and everything? I shared the deepest, most important part of my life. Man. All right, look. This is our second episode, so obviously we're still working the kinks out, and I'm still getting in the swing of all the things. You already saw the slide if you were watching with all the socials and all the stuff. Just so you can see it again, we'll bring that up at the end. Look, um, I hope you had a great weekend. And I had a wonderful weekend with my family. I was just telling you that you couldn't hear with my mic off that I took my kid out to see a big boy train. Thing was huge, and to see the look on his face as the train whistle goes and he's plugging his ears because it's just massive. And that thing, man, if you haven't seen one of those, they are huge and they are awesome. So anyway, super fortunate to have an awesome family. I hope you spent time with your family, people you love, and people who love you this weekend. And of course, we prayed. You missed the prayer, but basically, the gist of it is that God would change our hearts and make us more like His Son as we lean into following after Him. Look, what we're going to talk about on the show, the basic rundown, we're going to talk about why doing too much is a problem. We're going to talk about kind of some of the complications we have in hearing and understanding each other. We're going to zoom into a little bit of detail there. And then, if we have time, we're going to talk about the Bible because why not? Because the Bible. And so hopefully you guys can all stick around for that. And hopefully you have an awesome time. All right, look. So just to get started, why is doing too much a problem? Why is that an issue for us when we follow Jesus? Well, I remember going to a leadership conference at one point, and they had this guy there, and this was a Christian leadership conference, run by Christians and followers of Jesus, and they hired a guy who was just a philanthropist, and I don't want to say philanthropist, but someone who was doing not-for-profit work, helping people out, and this guy had revitalized downtown New Jersey. They had a massive homeless problem. And so he was there to speak to us about, a room full of pastors about charity and what we're doing at our churches. And his biggest criticism was, you're trying to do everything. So you go to your website and there's just a list of everything going on. And you can't do everything. You're like a church of 200. How are you going to do everything? So pick one thing and do that well. And I think that oftentimes, when we get to focus, that's a really good advice. He's like, look, we went into downtown New Jersey. There's a homelessness problem. We didn't try and do all the things. There's other issues. That's the problem we're trying to fix. So we focused. But the other thing, well, and before we move on from that, really, in our churches, we can spread out our focus and we can forget that we kind of have this singular goal, live like Jesus. And then live like Jesus in our local area. And so then we look around in our local area and we see what is the one thing we can do like in our neighborhood. But because of our how marketing and how the internet works and how awesome it is that we have all this transportation that allows us to move so freely throughout the world and the country, oftentimes we have people coming to our faith communities that are coming from miles around. And so we feel like our faith community, it's kind of pulled to stretch itself beyond its local block where it can actually minister and see people, look them in the face and love them. And so our focus can kind of get spread between trying to do all the things. Well, over in my neighborhood, we need this. Over in my neighborhood, we need that. And so then you look on the church website and here's 100 ministries. So maybe if our primary goal is to live like Jesus, then maybe we can focus the lens a little bit and say, in my neighborhood, how would Jesus live? Now, oftentimes, like one of the criticisms I get about this a lot is, Bob, this sounds very works oriented. It sounds like you're just trying to do this all on your own. Where's the spirit? And I get that kind of criticism actually quite a lot. And it's funny because like I get up in the morning and I spend time with God in prayer. I read my Bible, I study the scriptures, I try and love others. I'm always trying to do something that, there's an old book called The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Great book. You can probably find it for $1 or $2 at your used bookstore. And it's easy read. You can knock it out in like an hour or two, probably. But the idea is that throughout the day, you're practicing the presence of God. And I'm trying to do that. But I don't always talk from that context. And so sometimes, you get some criticism there. And then when you say, look, our primary goal should be to live like Jesus, then people come at you and go, well, that sounds pretty unspiritual. And so my challenge is, if I'm living like Jesus, then who is the most spiritual person on the planet? Well, that would be Jesus. So if I'm going to live in the Spirit and practice the presence of God, I have a working model that I can look at to check myself and see how I'm doing, right? I've got the teacher's edition. I've got the answer key. I'm just going to look at Jesus, and then I'm going to do that. In fact, what did Jesus say in John? I only do what I see the Father doing. And so literally everything he does, he's saying that's what the Father's doing, and that's what I'm doing. And so then if I'm living in the Spirit, it's going to look like Jesus. So practically from that aspect in this podcast, we're going to talk a lot about living like Jesus and being like Jesus, and that'll be our focus. Okay, so back to this story about New Jersey, doing too many things. So if we zero in our focus on live like Jesus, that can help us refine some. And then maybe we don't just try and do all the things. We just look at the thing that Jesus would do. Because you remember that story, Jesus has ministry right in front of him, and they're like, hey, but Lazarus is sick. You got to come heal Lazarus. We know you can come heal him. And he's like, yeah. And he waits a couple of days. He's got ministry right in front of him. And God can take care of all the things. So all the things doesn't need to be our responsibility. All the things is God's responsibility. The thing right in front of us, that's our responsibility. The person right in front of us, that's our responsibility to engage and to love. The person right in front of us, the neighbor right near us, and the people on our block, and then to work our way out. But also, what was interesting about this story, this guy revitalizing New Jersey, downtown New Jersey, is like, we didn't come in and build homeless shelters, and we didn't do food banks and provide blankets and coats and things like that, because our goal was to deal with the problem of homelessness, not to deal with the symptoms of homelessness, right? And so all of those things are problems for homeless people. Where am I going to get food, shelter, warmth when it's cold, all of those, and all those things. Well, those are symptoms of the initial problem, is that I'm homeless. And so then they looked at revitalizing the economy, providing jobs for people. Many people are homeless because they just they've kind of given up. There's not a lot of opportunity, and they're not really into working at McDonald's, and especially men, we kind of like need purpose and something to strive for in our lives. So there's those can be some very real issues. Beyond that, just make sure I got my stream going here, guys. Sorry. All right. Beyond that, whatever the issues are that led them there, drugs or anything else like that, if you deal with those underlying symptoms and those core problems, then you can deal with the problems that come from the core problems. And that's what I really want to focus on here. We're never going to talk about a problem without talking about a solution. I'm not into just, there's enough negativity in the world that it seems like I can't walk out my front door without stepping in some of it and having to wipe it off my shoe. And so I'm not trying to be endlessly negative. When I'm critical or anything like that, it's going to be to point towards a purpose. So let's get kind of started on that a little bit. All right, we're going to follow Jesus. We're not going to let things get too wide or too broad. We're going to kind of zero in. And then just like this guy revitalized, downtown New Jersey eons ago. So who knows what state it's in now. But they had great numbers they were showing on the other side of it. The homelessness was going down. People's lives were improving because they dealt with the core issues. And that's where we want to be, dealing with the core issues. So I want to take a second and let's zoom into kind of the three focuses that we have here. The three focuses that we have in terms of, following Jesus and following Jesus together, where we want to hang our hat, sharing a goal, live like Jesus. But then also we have this other problem where we don't have great conversations when it comes to how we follow Jesus and how we relate to Jesus, when we find out that we disagree, the conversation blows up. It turns into condescension, turns into dismissal, and you challenge people to empathize, but then they do this like, condescension plus empathy, this condesempathy bit where they're like, oh, I feel so bad for you. It's like, well, that's really not empathy. And to be clear on empathy, sometimes we confuse empathy with relating to someone's emotions. But the real trick to empathy is understanding all of the things that are underneath, right? So let's say guy with broken arm comes up to sympathy. And sympathy says, oh my gosh, what happened? You got a cast on your arm. Says, well, I broke it. And sympathy says, oh, I broke my arm once. It really hurts, man. I bet you're in a lot of pain and it itches and all the things. And how many pencils have you lost down there? And yeah, that's true. Guy with broken arm says. And then they move on. And it was kind of a connection and like, oh, sure. So guy with broken arm comes up to empathy. And, pardon me, empathy says, oh my gosh, you got a cast. Did you break your arm? Yeah. How'd you break your arm? Well, right there we have a difference, right? Sympathy didn't even bother to ask how. Just said, oh, I broke my arm too. And so empathy says, how? And then guy with broken arm says, well, actually, I didn't break it. It was someone else who broke it. And empathy says, what? Somebody else broke your arm? What's going on with that? And empathy says, well, see, I owed a lot of money to this guy, and I'm not able to pay him. And empathy goes, oh my gosh, why do you owe so much money? And the guy with broken arm says, well, I made this bet, and it was a massive bet, and I didn't have the money to back it. Oh my gosh, says empathy. Why did you do that? You see how the questions keep coming? It's just why. Why? Oh my gosh, why? I'm trying to listen in and I'm trying to understand your position. And so empathy says, well, I made the big bet because I got a friend in the hospital and there's a big hospital bill. Oh gosh, what happened to your friend? And it just endlessly goes. And the more we understand someone's position and the why behind their decision makings, what is motivating what they're saying, what is motivating why they're doing what they're doing, the more we let them tell us that, the more we can put ourselves in their shoes. And then we don't have to reach for feelings like sympathy does. We can actually see through their eyes and will naturally be led to how they feel. We'll naturally be led to the feeling of helplessness for their friend without insurance in the hospital and desperation for making a bid they can't make, and sorrow, or making a bet they can't follow through on, and sorrow for not the bet not coming through and not having any of their options, and that the pain of the broken arm reminds them of their friend in the hospital who's dying. And you see how the complication of the feelings all work in there when we try and naturally hear someone for what they're trying to say. Pardon me here, real quick. I'm going to try and clear my throat here for a second. Okay, we'll see if that works. Sorry for the raspy voice, man. I thought I was kind of over this, but it's allergy season out here, so you just don't know. Okay, so we get the idea, right? We want to do empathy, not sympathy. And so where are we going with this? How do we hear each other? Well, the first thing is, someone says something, and remember, because what's the most important thing for us is the person right in front of us. And so this person right in front of us, that's our greatest calling. And whatever's coming out of their mouth is the most important thing to them. And how dare it not be the most important thing to us when we're talking to them? Now, look, we don't have all the time in the world sometimes. We have jobs, we have lives, but there's no reason we can't say, man, I got to run to work. Can I call you later? Will you call me later? That's even better because they won't forget to call you if they have a problem, right? Will you call me tonight? I'm off work at 8 and I just want to hear, you know, if you want, you can send me an email and just write it all out and I'll read it. We can talk later. If it's a theological concern, man, I'm with you. I may not agree, but gosh, I really want to hear you. Is there a good book that represents what you think, or is this kind of something where you need to spell it out for me? The thing is, when the person we're talking to and the thing they're saying isn't the most important thing in our life at that moment, then people walk away feeling kind of dismissed and othered. And they feel like then when we want to come back and talk about Jesus, that they're just part of our Amway scheme, our multi-level marketing scheme to grow our church and to network out our product. And we don't want to make Jesus feel like a product to people. Instead, we want to make people feel like they met Jesus by how we've treated them. And we often miss that because we fall into this idea that some conversations are just not for now. We have bigger fish to fry. How many times have I heard that phrase? A ton. Or, that's not really, there's more important things, more important battles we have to fight. And the only time I'll agree with that is if we're talking about the whole world everywhere, right? If we're talking about the whole world everywhere and we're doing some several thousand people event, sure, we've got to focus on the highest priority. We've got to triage what we're going to talk about. And maybe we should just talk about the gospel and not this obscure theological thing. But that's really not how the Christian life is typically lived. Those are moments, brief moments, where there'll be thousands of people there. What we really experience in the Christian life is a lot of life to life. I'm talking to one person after church, or 2 or 3 people after church, or in my small group, or my Christian buddy who comes over for coffee. And these complicated conversations come up. We don't know where to go. And so then we punt. We say, well, you just need to give it to God. And what the person with the problem hears is, give it to God, but not to me. I'm not really here for that. I'm here for the other Christian stuff, but not the thing that you're trying to tell me. So remember, the most important thing that someone is telling you, the most important thing to someone is the thing they're telling you right then, even if it seems simple, pedestrian, or irrelevant. And the best thing we can do is really come to listen and hear and understand. Well, now here comes a big problem, right? Let's say we have a disagreement over something spiritual. Like I've had conversations in the past year with 2 or 3 different people about things like demon possession, miracles, and do miracles still happen, and all those conversations. And those are the conversations, that's the substance of the conversations that we're afraid to engage in, because if we engage in it, we're going to fight. Because here's how it goes. Someone will say, I don't know, I think maybe the kind of miracles that Jesus did ended in the 1st century. This is representing, the cessationist position, that miracles ended in the 1st century. Jesus did all these miracles as signs to testify that he was God. And it's not that God isn't acting in our world now, healing people and doing things, but maybe miracles ended. The real walking on water and raising the dead was for then. And that sounds like a faithless position. You think God's not still doing the same thing? It's the same God. And then we end up having these conversations over our conclusions. And then someone who is on maybe the miracle side, or the, if we're talking, demon possession or things like that, spiritual forces, all that kind of stuff. And someone will say, well, let me tell you, I had an experience, or my friend had an experience. And the conversation shuts down or it blows up. Why? Well, as soon as we onboard our experience, then what? So if the person disagrees and has an explanation for my experience, and I'm saying, no, I really witnessed a miraculous thing, and someone else has an explanation for it, I'm going to feel like they're calling me a liar. It's going to turn personal. And so there's no real way to talk about things when we start using personal stories and we make everything personal. So one of the first things we have to do if we truly want peace and we truly want unity in Jesus is we have to figure out how we can talk about the most difficult things and set ourselves aside. Be willing to see something we've experienced or seen in a different light. Consider if there is a different explanation. That's really hard, you know. But that's one of the biggest complications of talking about life and faith and spirituality. How do we get to the truth of the matter? And if I can bring up my experience, then that's kind of like a conversation ender. So my advice to you in this is, if you want peace, when you bring up your experience, I would suggest saying it as something like, I had this experience, and I'll tell you what I experienced, but I want to let you know it's okay if you want to offer different opinions about what I experienced. But I'll tell you the details of how I felt and what I perceived, and then we can explore this together. But if you're on the other side of that issue, you're not going to win by throwing Bible verses, right? If I just throw Bible verses back at someone and explain complicated theology, well, then they've done this vulnerable thing and opened themselves up to say, okay, I'm willing to find peace about how these spiritual matters happen and what's going on in the universe. And then you get hit with Bible verses. That's not really, it feels like you let the walls down and they just opened fire. And so if someone is humble enough to let the walls down, then maybe say, okay, let's put a pause on your experience and let's just kind of look at the issue from a bigger perspective. And then we'll see if any of our bigger perspectives come back to your individual experience. But that's one of the ways that we don't have healthy conversations about Jesus. We let our experience lead the way. And that puts us in an elevated position over others because it's our experience. And so I know. And so, you can't tell me that, demons aren't real because I know what I saw and I know what I heard and I know what I felt. And you can't tell me that people aren't possessed by demons. Well, okay. The trick in unity is realizing something that we call the paradox of following Jesus. I'm aiming towards Jesus, but I'm the imperfect, broken person. So everything I perceive in my world is filtered through this imperfection that God is reshaping. And anything that I'm not willing to reconsider is a place that God is. How can I cooperate with the transformational work of God in my life if I'm holding on to a spot and I'm not willing to reconsider it? Now, maybe I'm right there. But here's kind of my thing. If I say 2 + 2 is 4 and someone says you're wrong, I would rather say, okay, maybe I am. Let's count the apples together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And so I'm perfectly okay living in this humility that maybe I'm wrong, because I know that if we go back through it and I actually was miscounting, the evidence will be there and I can just walk through it. So this is a really difficult part of how we follow Jesus in terms of leaning into things that are personal and things that are difficult. What I'd love to hear from you is if you have any stories about how personal moments have really broken up or blown up in relationships. Don't use names, don't call people out, but has this happened to you? Have you been on either side of this? And how have you solved this in the past? And when you've worked it out, if the relationship has been restored, did you guys come to the same position? Or is this a moment where you said, well, you have your view and I have my view, and let's just keep following Jesus? My take on that is when person A has their view and person B has their view, and we're just going to follow Jesus, and you say what you want and do what you want on this, and I'll say and do what I want on this. We have pluralized Jesus. Now there's two Jesuses in the room, metaphorically, or you know, two proclamations of Jesus, if you will. You know, the Jesus that I'm teaching and preaching, and the Jesus that my brother is teaching and preaching, or my sisters in Christ is teaching or preaching. And my hope is to get back to 1 Corinthians 1:10. In fact, if you haven't read that verse, it's a good time. Let's bring up some Bible here. First Corinthians 1. Let's do it this way. 1 Corinthians 1, Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, obviously, because it's Corinthians, and I hate these headers. It's okay. It kind of helps you find your place, but I'm a big fan of no headers because sometimes the headers kind of misframe the content, and sometimes they're placed out of order in the content, and I'd rather kind of read through and let the author tell me what his outline is than depend on commentary for the author's outline, if that makes sense. I know I'm persnickety and weird. So, all right, here it is. 1 Corinthians 10 is the memory verse at our faith community right now. I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another in what you say, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly united in mind and thought. Now, if Paul is appealing to this unity of mind and of thought, and that they be perfectly united where they're divided, well, then he goes on for the rest of his letter and he talks about where they're divided and where they're missing things. One of the things that you pay attention for when you read Paul's writings, he's always trying to explain complicated things as an appeal to more unity. He walks people through the complication, sorts them out on it, and then tries to make an appeal to more unity. So, this is not something that this is something we achieve moment by moment, right? Paul's appeal here for unity, oftentimes we look at this, we say this is impossible. Bob, we're never going to agree in this lifetime about everything. There's just too much. We're just too different. We're all too broken. Let's just throw our hands in the air and say, oh, well, who cares? When we do that, then the unity that we share shrinks. And then people from the outside look at us and identify us by the parts that are unified. And so what they see is this small kernel of Jesus and all these threads of disagreement that go out everywhere. And I think the idea behind following Jesus should be generally the opposite of that, that they see a group of people who have all these disagreements coming to a greater unity where they have disagreements. And I think that's kind of the appeal here, that we're going to walk through these difficult things, and I'm going to say some hard and challenging things to you, is Paul's position. And through that, I'm going to help you come to the same mind and the same idea on who Jesus is and how all that works. And so I want to encourage you to lean into these difficult conversations. The challenge for you this week is, and maybe just today, when a difficult conversation comes up, don't do everything, right? The question and the focus is, how does this create unity for us in following Jesus? If Jesus is my goal, how can this be a moment where we might seek unity? And then realize nobody cares about what we think. The first thing we want to do is make sure that we fully understand their position and we steel-man it. So we listen and we listen and we listen, and then we say it back to them. And if we ask questions, it's not that Socratic questioning where we're challenging and we're trying to point out the flaws in their thought to shift them off of their position. We're not trying to change the subject because it's awkward or uncomfortable to hear things that we might know are factually inaccurate. but we just listen. We just hear. We lean into understanding. We say what they believe back to them when we get their affirmation. And then we invite them to hear what we think and to lean in. But we're never going to get there unless we can go to Scripture. Now, I wanted to get a little into Scripture today, but I think that we're going to hit that a little bit tomorrow. And we're going to look at some of these phrases here. One of the things we need to understand about the New Testament is that these people are living in the Old Testament. And what I mean by that is, okay, Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament, and there's like 400 years, and then the time of Jesus, and then these people, a couple decades after Jesus start writing, and maybe they were writing before, but the writings that we have are from, at earliest a couple decades after Jesus' death or more. And I would put them all before 66 AD. I think that's a pretty significant marker if you know history. And so I might put, the letters earliest, and then maybe the Gospels coming in the early 60s or late 50s or something, and then maybe Hebrews is last. But that's a whole different can of worms. And I know if you know dating, or if you've read books on dating the New Testament, you're probably wanting to type in all the correct order. You feel free to do that. I'll listen to your arguments about order. But those New Testament writings were written by people who were still living in this Second Temple context, who were still living with Torah and the priesthood and all of those things. And so when they use certain phrases that are confusing to us, our first call should be to go back to the Old Testament and say, was this phrase used somewhere else? So I'll give you one here. We'll do one real quick on a real controversial one here. This is Matthew 24, and we're going to look at Matthew 24, and we'll just do 1 through 40, and then we'll do Isaiah 19. And so this is kind of the how to read your Bible stuff here. That, and you can even see the destruction of the temple and signs of the end times, right? And so they've already framed it for you, and they've told you what it means before that you even got there. And so you're not allowed to think that it's not anything but end times, right? Because the commentator, that's why I don't like the headings. It's like, I love those guys, and these commentators do a great job, or these translators do a great job, but that's why I prefer to read without. So let's go all the way down here. The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky. I really want to take that one. This is the sentence I want to cover right here. And then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Okay, well, that's interesting. Coming on the clouds with power and great glory, and all the earth will mourn. And let's look at earth here, because earth, tribes of the land. And I'm guessing that if we pulled up the Greek, in fact, let me pull up the Greek here real quick, that it's that word oikumene. And oikumene is the same word used in Luke 2:1, where it says a censor, Caesar sent a decree out to the whole oikumene that a census should be taken, right? So what's going on there? Well, Caesar is trying to do a new tax, and what is oikumene? Did he send it to the Aztecs? Did he send it to the Britons, the barbarians, the Mongols? Did he send? Is that where his decree went out? No, Caesar's decree went out to, the Mediterranean area, everywhere Rome had authority. That's where Caesar's decree went out. And so then that's that phrase, oikumene. And let me just double check. Before I get ahead of myself. All right, well, without my glasses, it's just a... Without my glasses, I can't tell. It might not be it. But regardless, we need to pay attention to these little comments because to the earth could be tribes of the land, which means not the whole globe, but to the region. All right? And so then they will see the sign of the Son of Man coming in heaven, the sign of the Son of Man coming in heaven, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn. All the tribes of the land will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. All right, let's go down here. Isaiah, a prophecy against Egypt, and this is something that happened. See, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and is coming to Egypt. Wait, what? Coming on the clouds, rides on a cloud. The idols of Egypt tremble before him, and the hearts of the Egyptians melt with fear. I will stir up the Egyptian against Egyptian. Brother will fight against brother. Neighbor against neighbor. City against city. Kingdom against kingdom. The Egyptians will lose heart, and I will bring their plans to nothing. They will consult the idols and the spirits of the dead and the mediums. And so this is about Israel or Egypt turning against itself. And then I believe, double check me on this, but I believe the Assyrians come and conquer them. So this phrase, when we're reading our New Testament, remember these people live in the Old Testament. So this phrase, coming on the clouds in Matthew 30, is the same earlier on when he says to the priest in Matthew, from now on you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds with great power, coming on the clouds of heaven or whatever he says. We're back to this apocalyptic kind of language from the Old Testament where God comes on a cloud and judges a nation. And so the comment here is likely not a literal comment. If these people are reading their Old Testament, and especially as much as Matthew quotes Isaiah, likely he's just taking the idiom out. And so one of the things that we have to consider, now we can debate that and see that differently and lean into that, but how would we get to the bottom of these issues when we have these issues? Well, to get to the bottom of these issues, we have to go back and say, how are we looking at this passage? Rather than start with our theologies and conclusions, we have to be able to go back and say, what did these passages mean first? And what did they mean to the people who wrote them? And that's why it's so important that we understand that the people who wrote our New Testament are kind of living in this culture and context that is found or that exists or that came from the people who wrote the Old Testament. So hopefully that makes that a little bit more clear. Guys, I really appreciate you tuning in. We're going to keep hitting these three things, and I'm going to keep working out the interwebs here and getting a little bit better. Please leave your comments, suggestions. If you have disagreements about things that I said, we can continue to bring them up on the podcast. Man, I totally appreciate you guys tuning in. And just to remind you, we do have all the socials and all the things. So hit me up and, start an internet war. Comment on the socials. I'm just kidding. Look, honestly, I think the internet is a great tool. And it's a shame that it's filled with all the snapback, clapback, mic drop, I'm going to straw man your position stuff. But I think that you and I can be better than that. And I invite you to be better than that with me. That it's just another place to have conversations. So have conversations in the way that Jesus would have conversations. And, if you find someone's a troll, move on. That's what Jesus did, right? He didn't spend a lot of his time. He spent the majority of his time with people who were going to hear his message, with the disciples and the people who received his message. And don't be afraid to speak truth, right? It can be divisive to say true things, but, they like to say, well, we don't have blasphemy laws in America, except if you speak against popular consensus, oftentimes, you can lose your job or get written up at work or whatever. But, speak the truth in love, always. So look, I think we can make the internet and the interweb a better place. I think you and I can be more than what we see and the hate that's perpetuated. And we can lean into this idea. And this is a great place to start with empathy. Hey, tell me more about that position. Why did you come to that position? How did you come to that position? Just let them keep talking and listen, and then say their position back to them. See what happens. See what follows after that, and see if God doesn't work in that relationship. And then when it comes down to the Bible stuff, rather than starting with all our theologies and conclusions and things, what if we just went back and said, but let's just look at the grammar and the literature and dump all that stuff and just try and read the book in its context. And what if we talk about how we should read these ancient writings rather than just throw Bible verses at each other? So I gave you a little sample of that at the end. We'll get into a little bit more of that as we go. Thanks again for tuning in and for watching. And we'll see you tomorrow at roughly the same time. Hopefully we can get going about 7 every morning. I'm just figuring some of this stuff out. So I was like a half an hour late. And then I was still, I can't believe I had black screen and no mic on the beginning of this podcast. But you guys are awesome for being early listeners, pure P1s, as they call it in the media game, whatever. But man, I really love you guys, and thanks for tuning in. Be well, and I hope your day is filled with tons of moments, tons of transparent moments. All right, see you tomorrow. Any moment we're gonna have a thing going on here, but apparently my media source I don't know why it didn't load up, but we'll get it now. All right, now let's try it. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.